Good evening, councillors. Good evening, member of the public. Good evening, officers and anyone who happens to be watching on YouTube. Welcome to this meeting of the Planning Applications Committee. First item on the agenda, apologies for absence. I believe we have 3.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we've received apologies from Councillors Mary Glowett, Councillor Victoria Wheeler and Councillor Helen Whitcroft. Substitutes tonight, Councillor Ling Perrott for Councillor Glowett, Councillor Pat Tedder for Councillor Wheeler and Councillor Alan Ashbury for Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you. Next item, minutes of the previous meeting. These have been circulated. Are members happy with those? Yes? Thank you. So I will sign. We'll do that at the end, shall we? Declarations of interest. Does any member have a pecuniary or non-pecuniary interest in any of the issues up for discussion this evening? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's agenda item 8. I've got a non-pecuniary interest. I've received correspondence from the applicant.
Thank you. Anyone else? I, of course, as chair, must declare that I've been in discussion regarding Mindenhurst quite a bit over the past months and probably will be in the future. Next item on your agenda is item 4. Now, those of you who have delved into this will note that if you've got the hard copy like I have, there are confidential pages associated with this item. If any discussion ventures into the content of those confidential papers, we have to go into private session. So what I'm going to do is to defer that item until the end of the agenda, so that if we do have to go into confidential session, it won't be backwards and forwards, in and out all evening. So, item 5, application number 23-1202, RRM, Princess Royal Barracks, Sarita.
Thank you, Chair. This evening we will be taking both items 5 and 6 together as they both relate to the new supermarket at Deepcut. Just to give a quick refresh, this is the Princess Royal Barracks redevelopment. The areas that we're looking at this evening is 5I, which is the supermarket site here, which is about the roundabout up here. Just to orientate, this is Dettingham Park, and then the sports hub is in this area up here, which will be the following item. Just to put it in context, this is an aerial photo of the site. So the site is in this location here. Goes across and up and down. This is the former headquarters building, which is in the process of being converted into 15 dwellings. The proposal is for the conversion of the existing museum building and the reconfiguration of the site. So just to give some views of the site, this is the access that is already provided from Mindenhurst Road. This was provided as part of the Phase 1 infrastructure. As you can see, there is the difference in levels. So from this southern boundary, it rises up about 3 metres to its northern boundary with Newfoundland Road. And this is looking up towards Deepcut Bridge Road from the new access. This is the area that is going to be retained as an open amenity area, primarily as habitat. So this is to the east of the site and to the south of the headquarters building, which you can see here. So these trees here are along this area here. And this is coming up to the Deepcut Bridge Road roundabout. So I'm standing by the care home, and you can see that this is the side elevation of the existing museum building, and you can see it closer. This is the crossing that is on Mindenhurst Road, and you've got the headquarters building here, the museum building here. And this is a view of the care home over here, and obviously existing properties on Deepcut Bridge Road here. And this is Newfoundland Road. The only vehicle access to the new supermarket will be from Mindenhurst Road. So the existing access that was on Newfoundland Road has already been closed. And you can see that the strategic cycle network is starting at the beginning of the junction here. This area is barriered because I understand that there's a historic right-of-way. So rather than integrating it into everything else, it wasn't possible. And this is views of the museum building from Newfoundland Road. As you can see, we're keeping the trees in this location. And one of the points behind the scheme that we have is that we're not digging up all the surfaces. So we're leaving a lot of the surfaces in place so that the existing access point in here will become a combined footway cycleway, and then the desired path will just be retained as is. And this is the relationship to the headquarters building. This has got, as I said, this is being converted at the moment into flats. So the accommodation in this elevation comprises kitchen, dining rooms, bedrooms, bathrooms, ensuite, that kind of living accommodation. We've got 2 little patios going in for 2 of the ground floor flats here, and as you can see, it's already been earthed over. And this is the proposal before us this evening. As you'll see from the papers, the original intention was to have a food store of something like 2,000 square metres. It went out to the market, and the retail operators would not support a building of that size, but they would support the conversion to provide a convenience store. As you will see from the papers, our retail consultant said, well, we could ask for more information, and we asking for different surveys and whatever. But at the end of the day, the fundamental issue is that the retail operators would not provide anything other than what they are prepared to do. So that is what we have at the, being proposed. So they're converting the existing building. They are reusing, or they're using the approved access from Mindenhurst Road. So we're going up the hill. We're coming into 24 spaces here. This is the reused access, as I said, for the footway cycleway, and this is the desired path that we already have to the front of the building. We will have EV charging in this position, including one to the disabled space. We have cycle parking to the front of the building here, and also to the front of the building here. The parking in this location will also provide a space for anybody who is a disabled cyclist, so we will have that provision as well. This area to the east, as I said, is being retained as an open amenity space, primarily as habitat. Just for information, this area here is part and parcel of the central sang. The changes to the elevation is a very light touch. The Newfoundland elevation is staying the same. The main change is on the south because that is going to be the access for the food store. The existing door that's here is going to be blocked up, and that's on the side facing the flats at the headquarters building. And this elevation is basically staying as is. We have a new entrance porch there, and you can see in profile the works required to provide level access into the food store. The proposal, it has 2 elements to it in terms of the use of the building. So this is the food store in this location here. And this will be accessed solely from the south. Then to the north, we have a flexible E-cum-F use classes, which is set out in the papers. The building as a whole will be operated and controlled by ASTA. So they will be responsible for how this space is also managed as well. And these are proposed visuals of what is being proposed. So you're coming up the hill. We've got new landscaping. And I want to go back one to my layout. We have got new landscaping coming in from here. We've got new trees being planted here. We have new hedging here. You'll notice from the committee papers that we are asking for that to be increased. Historically, when it was a museum, and this was run by this was occupied by the military, the access road, as you can see, went all the way around. As part of the headquarters building permission, we have got a 1.8 metre high fence going on their side, because obviously they need to safeguard their amenity space for their residents. But also on the food store side, we have got a 2.1 metre high fence going in along here as well. For two reasons. We have the servicing area in this location here, and we want to make sure that as far as possible that any impacts on residents are mitigated as far as we can. The food store is also subject to a condition on the hybrid that still needs to be complied with in terms of noise mitigation. You'll see from the proposal that we are recommending conditions in relation to lighting, because lighting can be an issue for neighbours as well. So we think that the quantum and of floor space and the uses proposed are acceptable. We think that the relationship to the headquarters building, which has a separation of about 9 metres, is acceptable and not materially different from that considered at the hybrid stage. In terms of trees and landscaping, we're happy in that. Conditions will control any queries that we have on that. The Highway Authority is satisfied that we have satisfactory car parking, sustainable travel, cycle parking, access and visibility. And the lead local flood authority are happy with the drainage that's being proposed, and Surrey Wildlife Trust are happy with the ecological information that's being submitted. In combination with this application, you will see that the next item is a non-material amendment application to change the opening hours for the store, which have come as a result of the operational requirements of ASDA. So we have basically an hour in the evening, Monday to Saturday, then an hour in the morning, and an extra 2 hours on a Sunday. Again, given the terms of the hybrid permission, what was expected on this site, we don't think that the impact would be materially different from the ones that were envisaged at that stage. And the recommendation on both applications is approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Councillor White, Councillor Garrett.
You showed where the service area was, and it's at the front of the building. How close is that to houses?
The separation distance between the building building to building is 9 metres. There's a very small distance there, so I would say 8.5. But the servicing is controlled by condition as well. It's so they have hours of restriction for when they can service the premises as well.
So, in Bagshot we've got a co-op, and there's restrictions on what sort of lorries can deliver. They can't be Arctic lorries because of the turnaround. That looks like there'll be a similar problem there with that. So I didn't see it. Is it conditioned the type of lorries that deliver?
That wasn't a condition that either we or the County Highway Authority have considered, because it's very difficult to control enforceability in terms of vehicles. I don't know if Andy Stokes is available. We do have the County Highway Authority with us this evening. I don't know if he can provide any further views on that. But what I would say is that the site constrains that it's actually, I don't think they would get an articulated lorry in there, to be honest. And they're not envisaging the big lorries, because the big lorries they will use to go to the one at Farnborough. So.
You're on mute. Still can't hear you. No. Just. I've left. Councillor Garrett, would you like to ask your questions while this gets sorted?
Yeah, no problem. Actually, one of my questions was about HGVs and deliveries as well, so I think we've probably covered that one off. The size of the store, having read some of the papers, it said about the fact that the expectation was a bigger store originally, and from what you've said, the retailers weren't interested in that. Is that based on the fact that of what the current housing is, as opposed to what the housing would be? Because it's obviously 2,000, isn't it, moving forward? And my second question was actually related to the lighting. Because there's the housing quite close, is there a condition which says they can't put any signs, etc., with lights on that wall?
In terms of the why the retail operators were not prepared to put a bigger store there, yes, they were aware of the overall Princess Royal Barracks development in combination with the remainder of the village. So yes, they were. They had issues with the site configuration, the site levels. So it was a combination of what they thought they could justify for that floor space and also the site constraints. In terms of the lighting, we are aiming to control all the lighting on this site because we know from past experience lighting can be very disturbing. And we also, obviously we have our people to consider, but we also have bats as well. So it needs a sensitive lighting management plan as well. So.
Okay, thank you.
We'll try again.
Hello, can you hear me this time?
Yay!
Oh, good, excellent. I logged out, logged back in again. Oh, that's good. So going back to the question, I think it was to do with the size of delivery vehicles. Is that correct?
It's whether or not articulated lorries. I mean, I can use that site, so I think that's what it's to do with.
I'd have to look at the plans to see which size vehicle they did the tracking on. But generally speaking, I mean, these type of uses generally tend to use the large rigid vehicles rather than Arctics. I have known certain situations where planning conditions have been used to limit the size of the delivery vehicle being used where there are particular constraints, but I don't see there's any particular constraints on this one. If you want me to, I can have a look at the drawings while the conversation is going on to see which size drawing it does refer to on the drawings, but I would imagine the applicant would have used the size vehicle for their tracking that reflected the size of the vehicle that they intended to use, if that makes sense.
We're quite happy to add a condition on the vehicles to be used if that would be helpful to members.
As an anecdotal bit of information, in Balmoral Drive we have a Tesco's that has delivery lorries going round the back, and they don't have any problem with that, and it's not as open or readily manoeuvred into than here is. So I would think it's probably going to be okay. Anybody else?
Just a general question about the two proposals tonight. Have we not looked at an idea of some sort of community building within the site? I may have missed something, but...
The overall Princess Royal Barracks development includes community facilities. We have a church hall being provided. Obviously, we'll go on to the sports hub as well, and that will have some kind of, when the pavilion comes forward, you'll see that will also have a community provision. But this particular phase was identified for a food store, but we do actually have some community use within this building as well. That is what they are thinking about as part of the flexible uses.
Anybody else? Councillor Wilson and Councillor White.
Yeah, just a quick question as a new member of this committee from since this was all approved, a hybrid stage much earlier. These are reserve matters we're looking at. We don't normally get reserve matters to this committee. Is that unusual, and why are we getting them for this application?
The reason that we're having all the reserve matters application coming to Deep Cut is that that was the resolution of the council when it determined the application back in 2014, that all reserve matters applications have to come to the planning committee.
And that's an unusual decision, is it? And do you know why the decision was taken?
It depends on the size of the development. Normally it's the size of the development that determines. Reserve matters aren't actually an application for planning permission. They are the very detailed matters following out an outline. But this was a hybrid permission, so part of it got full permission, part of it was an outline and needed reserve matters. So it's an interesting permission, and it expires next month. So that's why you will find an awful lot of Deep Cut stuff coming forward.
Yeah, that's my point really, is that if we didn't have to consider all the reserve matters at the committee, it would be a lot quicker and we wouldn't be up against the deadline. But
the deadline is for the submission of the detail, is for the submission of the reserve matters. So everybody is working to get those in before the beginning of April. But in the fullness of time, many of those schemes would need to come to committee anyway, simply by virtue of their size.
right.
Because we're talking about 100 dwellings, 237 dwellings, so quite substantial, that we would bring before the committee in any event.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor White, then Andy again.
Thank you. Condition 46, the timings 7 till 10 on a Monday, and that's the new timings, is it? And if that's the case, we had similar application for timings at Waitrose in Bagshot, and then the residents came to a gentleman's agreement with the lorries and everything when they were delivered, because 7 o'clock in the morning is far too early to have great big lorries unloading, especially in a residential area.
The servicing conditions are not changing. It is the hours of the operation for the actual store itself. So the servicing ones are what we had from 2014. So.
Andy.
You're
Muted again.
Can you hear me now? Good, excellent. Sorry, just check the transport assessment. The drawing shows that it was a rigid vehicle, a large 10-metre rigid vehicle. There's ample space for the vehicle to turn within the site. So if in the rare situation an Arctic was brought onto site, I can't see for any reason that it wouldn't be able to turn. Might make it a bit more difficult, but I'm pretty certain that it would be able to would be able to turn within the site.
Thank you. Are we all done? Are we taking one at a time?
Yeah.
Yes. So we have a recommendation from the officers to approve. Can I have a proposer for that? Number 5, 23-1202. Councillor Garrett, seconded by Councillor Rowlands. All those in favour? Anyone against?
Excuse me, Chair. If it's... Oh, carry on, sorry.
Unanimous.
Unanimous, okay. Yeah.
Next, we have the second part, the extended hours of operation, 240039. Can I have a proposer for that? Councillor Thompson, seconded by Councillor Tedder. All those in favour? Unanimous. Thank you very much. I think it's you again, Sarita.
Thank you, Chair. The second application for Deep Cut, or the second reserve matters application for Deep Cut this evening, relates to the Sports Hub. This is at the northern end of the Princess Royal Barracks development. To orientate yourself, this is Dettingham Park. This is Deep Cut Bridge Road up here. And this goes on to the military land further over here. As you can see, it is a component part of the wider recreational open space at the northern end of the site. Members may recall that last September we dealt with the green space in North Dettingen and Alma here, and also the allotments. So the proposal that we're looking at this evening is the sports hub, which is in this location here, with the exception of the pavilion. That has come in as a separate application. And just to provide some photos, this is the view of the western part of the sports hub. So this is tree-lined both sides, and at the moment it is a large grass area, and part of it is being used as a site compound. Access to the sports hub will be from this part of Somme Road. The access arrangements were approved as part of the allotments and the Angst application last year. And this is standing with at the northern end of the site looking south towards Dettingen Park. So this is where you will have the car park, the Mugger multi-use games area, the neighbour-equipped area of play, and the tennis courts. And again, it's just to show you the relationship between Crofters Close and Dettingen Park and the proposals. And again, this is just looking at the existing houses in Dettingen Park. In this area here, we will actually have phase 4D, which is a small residential phase that is coming forward. So most of these houses will be screened by the new development. And this is looking back this is looking west. So we've got Crofters Close here, which is in Dettingen Park. This is part of the Angst here. And then you're just looking across to what will be the western area of the sports hub. And to give some detail to that, the existing former military road, which was this one, is going to be used as a combined footway cycleway. We've got the car park here, and that is for 68 spaces, including 12 EV spaces and 4 disabled spaces. And we've got cycle parking for 20 cycles in this location. We have got the multi-use games area, which also includes 4 floodlights. We've got the neighbour-equipped area of play. And at the southern end of the site, we have got the tennis courts. You'll notice we've got alternative markings on both the Mugger and the tennis courts. This will allow for dual use for basketball on the Mugger and also for netball on the tennis courts. As you can see, the relationship, this is obviously part of the Angst here, and this is where 4D commences. And there's more detail of the neighbour-equipped area for play. So we have various facilities for children. And then this is obviously the floodlighting plan here. Looking north, the closest residential properties to the north are in Ain Road. At the moment, they are all vacant bar one. They're waiting transfer, as I understand. And the area to the east is going to be the provision of the football pitches, football cum cricket pitch, 2 junior football pitches, the cricket nets, which will be in these areas here and here. And we will also have the outdoor gym as well. So this will be in this location over here. This is a view from Alma Gardens, which is to the south of the sports hub, looking towards Ain Road over here. This is going to be the western area of the sports hub. So it just gives you some idea of the context. This is from what will be the Alma Angst. And to put that into some kind of context, you can see the properties in Ain Road here. We have got the full-size football pitch here and the cricket square here. Cricket nets are just on this bit of the map. And then we've got the 2 junior football pitches. You can see we've got additional landscaping, little buns going around the site. And this is the outdoor gym. So basically this is the cycle way through, and then we've also got another footway that goes round. The provision of the sports hub is basically prescriptive. It's set out in both the conditions in the hybrid permission, but also in the section 106. And in that respect, the proposal is in accordance with what the council requires as part of this permission. One of the things that we have been very mindful of is to make sure that the proposals are appropriate in relation to our existing and future residents. And to that mind, we have imposed various conditions to ensure that appropriate levels of amenity are retained for those. In terms of highway matters, the Highway Authority is satisfied with the parking provision, cycle provision, access and other visibility issues, subject to the appropriate imposition of appropriate conditions. You'll see from your update sheet that there are some amendments. There was a glitch, we think, in some of the printing, so we don't know why it didn't like referring to the legal agreement, but that's what those glitches relate to. The applicant has commented on the conditions. We are not agreeing to his proposed changes to conditions 2 and 4 because we think the conditions we've imposed will have some impact on trees and landscape, so we want to retain control over what is going to be there. With regard to condition 15, we are happy to add, unless otherwise agreed in writing, there are no planning issues associated with that. Condition 19 is proposed to be amended. There is an amendment to that to add cabling next to ducting at the request of the County Highway Authority. We agree that condition 20 may be deleted as it is a duplicate of 23, and we are happy to amend the trigger on the provision of the details of the equipment. Subject to those, we have had no further representations from the community, and the recommendation is to grant. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members. Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, Chair. Just two questions. Obviously, this site historically has had issues with contamination. Do we know if there's any issues with that particular area? And question number 2, accessibility. I'm assuming it's all going to be accessible for wheelchairs, etc.
Answer to both your questions, yes. Condition 55 on the hybrid permission deals with contamination, and it has 3 parts to it. It has the go and have a look and see what's there. Do you need to remediate? And if you do need, we want a verification plan. So everything in this area, because it's going to be used by the public, will be absolutely watched and verified, in accordance with the terms of the condition. And yes, everything will be suitable for disabled access.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. It's a very extensive set of facilities for the area. Is it anticipated that this will serve mainly the Middenhurst residents, or is it expected to serve a much wider area within the borough? And if the latter, is there going to be an element of management? Are we expecting this to be a lot of football pitches on a Saturday morning that all the local teams will be playing on, or is it more a rock up and play with your mates kind of situation?
As it is currently anticipated, it will be transferred to the Council for Management. So I would assume that it will be managed in accordance with our normal criteria. We do have Sue McCubbin available if you want further clarification on that. The purpose of the facilities is primarily to serve the Middenhurst development. That's what it's there for. It's part and parcel of that overall package of facilities. But that's not to say that the rest of the community can't come and play, because that's the very nature of the facilities we're providing, or that will be provided. So I think it's an element of both. I think it is certainly in the first instance for Deep Cut, but I think as time goes on, it's like all sports facilities throughout the borough. You will invariably go to Lightwater, or you might go to, further out. It really, it's a benefit to the community as a whole, I would say.
It's worth remembering that the car parks have space for coaches visiting teams. If it's Mindenhurst, a lot of people will just walk there. There are 64 car park spaces, so that's encouraging, inter-area matches and so on and so forth. Councillor Noble.
Thank you, Chair. I note that we've got use for cricket, football, and the Muga. There's no use for rugby, for example. And as a former squad manager for a rugby club, my club used to play on this land. It was a sort of an overflow when Watchets wasn't available due to flooding. And I just wondered whether we can apply a condition for use of rugby as well? No? Okay. Okay, thank you.
When the original hybrid permission was done, part of the facilities within the overall barracks included an artificial sports pitch. That was not going to be replicated as part of the deep cut redevelopment. As you'll note on page 121 of the agenda, it was recognised that rugby needed something, and we have got a financial contribution, and it will go to either Frimley Lodge Park or Watchets Recreation Ground. So that is how rugby was considered and addressed as part of the hybrid permission.
Councillor Perrott.
Yep, thank you. Just to check, because I'm subbing, so I just understand that the managing of this facilities would be from the by who, and of course, would it be like another leisure centre, like Lightwater Leisure Centre, Walking Leisure Centre type facility?
It is envisaged that it will be transferred to the council for the council to operate, but the legal agreement does allow for the applicant to appoint somebody else. I think it is most unlikely, simply because of the level of negotiations that have taken place with that include Sue McCubbin. So they are trying to make sure that everything is to what the council would expect to see, and that is particularly true. You'll see that when the pavilion comes forward as well. But yes, it will be, hopefully.
Ms McCubbin, do you want to say anything, as you were mentioned by Sarita?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd love to. It is envisaged that the building would come over to us to look after, along with all of the pitches and everything else. The chances are akin with sort of the tennis courts that we have now, that we'd probably look to have a sort of a gate system, maybe a provider who operates from there. I know a lot of clubs are looking for home grounds and would maybe take on the pavilion. And so there's lots of things that we can consider doing. I don't think that we'd necessarily run it in-house. We'd look to clubs that operate in the local area to help us with the best management arrangements for the site. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Anybody else? Any questions? No? We have an officer recommendation to approve with conditions. Can I have a proposer? Councillor Noble, seconder Councillor Omani. All those in favour, please raise. Unanimous. Thank you. Everybody duck. So the next one, before Councillor Garrett gets back, if we could get ready for it. Duncan. Councillor Garrett. Just so you don't miss anything, I've signed the minutes.
Oh, thank you.
Duncan.
Thank you, Chair. This application relates to an extension to the garden centre at Long Acres following the demolition of an existing extension and polytunnel within the site. The site lies in the Greenbelt. There are no updates, and I'll briefly lead you through the plans and photos. The application site is part of the wider Long Acres nursery site, a garden centre off the A30 London Road north east of Bagshot. The area in red includes the siting of the proposal and the structures to be removed. The area in blue relates to the wider garden centre site. The middle image is an aerial photo to match the site location plan with the outline of the main garden centre building with the silver roof. Car parking is provided to the front of the site with the access off the A30 Grove End roundabout and a retail sales area at the rear. The right-hand image is a more recent close-up of the siting. The polytunnel is shown to the rear of the main building. This polytunnel is lawful through the Lawful Development Certificate 22/0667, and this polytunnel is to be removed. And the flat roof structure is the cafe extension and the rear part of the cafe as shown. That rear part is an unheated part of the cafe. These elements of the cafe are lawful over time and are to be removed. Just an image of the front entrance of the main glasshouse, the garden centre building, and an image of inside the garden centre. This is the rear of the main glasshouse with the cafe elements, the extension in the distance, and a closer view of that extension which is to be removed here, and the flat roofed extension at the side. Here's the polytunnel at the rear yard which is to be removed. And here's a comparison of the existing site plan to the left and proposed to the right. It shows the rear of the main glasshouse building, including the polytunnel to be removed, and the cafe extensions notified as restaurant seating to be removed, as well as the proposed extension here. These are the proposed elevations. The west elevation drawing at the bottom of the slide shows the side view of the extension. The north elevation in the middle shows the extent of the extension viewed from the rear, and this is seen against the backdrop of the existing glasshouse building. And just for completeness, the south elevation is the view from the front. That shows where it would be, but it would be hidden from view behind the existing building. Here is a comparison of the existing and proposed floor plans. Again, existing on the left, proposed on the right. Shows the restaurant seating areas to be demolished. And the extension, the dotted line, shows the extent of the existing rear wall that is to be retained. And these are the locations of the restaurant areas to be removed. The proposal would reduce the overall amount of lawful development on the site in both floor space and volume terms. The extension would be seen against the backdrop of the main glasshouse building and would only be clearly visible from the rear yard of the site. It's considered that the proposal is not inappropriate development in the Greenbelt and would have no adverse effect on character, residential amenity, retail impact, parking capacity and highway safety. The application is recommended for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, Councillor White.
I'd like to ask the question is, when is a garden centre not a garden centre anymore? We had an application in front of us a good few years ago now for a food hall, which is now a full-blown restaurant. Sorry, a supermarket. The cafe area, I think, is nearly doubling in size. Getting rid of the polytunnels, which were supposed to be a temporary buildings on Greenbelt, and that's why they were allowed, I think, last time. Where are the extra special circumstances for extending onto what is classed as the Green Belt? Extra cafe areas are going to cause more customers, which is going to cause more car parking. Car park is always overcrowded, no matter what time of the day or the evening or weekend you come to. I appreciate that this business is a good employer and they employ a lot of people in the area, and got to applaud them for that. But the type of businesses that are there, I know that's not part of this application, and I do apologise for bringing it up, but the type of businesses that are there were not supposed to be detrimental to the village of Bagshot. The businesses that are there are taking business away from the village, i.e. hairdressers and food stores and extra. I don't go there, I must admit, so I don't have to declare an interest that I use the place. I just feel this is total overdevelopment of a site that was once a nice garden centre where you could go and get your plants. Now you can just go round there for the day and get absolutely everything for your house. So the question is, when is a garden centre not a garden centre anymore?
There is case law around the issue of garden centre, and we know that over time the site has changed many moons ago, and it has a retail use rather than an agricultural use, if for want of a better expression. The old glass houses, where a lot of anything for sale was prepared on site. It's not that anymore, and nobody would argue that it is. In terms of the proposal that's in front of members, it is an overall reduction in built form over the lawful amount of development that is on the side. Overall, there's a reduction of about 300 square metres, so it's the volume difference is tiny, but it is a reduction, and that is what is in front of members tonight.
So therefore you're losing the facility to grow plants, because you're getting rid of the polytunnels, so therefore there's no facility to grow the plants, so therefore when is a garden centre not a garden centre?
This facility is for the sale of goods in there. It's not a nursery anymore, and it hasn't been for some time. It is a retail outlet, and that's how it would be defined now.
Councillor Garrett, then Councillor Wilson, then Councillor Rowlands.
Location, Long Acres Nursery. So looking at the thing before us, the graphic before us, so the reason it's less is because we're getting rid of the polytunnels, basically, because looking at that looks like it's taking up more space, looking at that. If you look at the dotted line, I know you've got a little bit square around the corner and you've got the bit on the side, but it looks like it's actually ultimately taking up more space. So is the difference because we are all removing the polytunnels? And is it possible to show on your graphic how many polytunnels, it wasn't obvious how many polytunnels were disappearing? And I suppose, unlike Councillor White, I better declare an interest because I do go to Long Acres and we do use the cafe, so I better declare that.
This image indicates where the polytunnel that is to be removed is. As I say, it's used for sales, it's not used for plant propagation.
Could you put your mouse over where it is? Because
Oh, will do, yeah. That's the polytunnel that's been removed.
Sorry, all of those are going, yeah?
That's all going, yes.
Okay, so that's why there's a difference in size, because we're removing a massive polytunnel and the cafe's going to get bigger. But ultimately, the cafe's ultimately bigger, but the difference is because we're getting rid of the polytunnels.
In terms of, I've got some measurements here, but those are the two areas that are also being removed. And then the extension is about that much. Oops. I'm just trying to sort of get a design line from this place, this position here. So it's that one there. So this area here is the extension to it. The cafe, there's some internal works, some internal expansion of the restaurant bit, which wouldn't technically require our permission. But overall, in terms of the cafe, we're taking off 300 square metres, adding about 320. And for the shop, the extension is 380, and we're losing from the internal about 170 and 700 from the polytunnel.
Chair, can I just ask a follow-up question? So, going back to Councillor White's question, and I don't think I was involved. So we gave permission for the polytunnels as a temporary structure, I believe, in the past.
No.
Is that not? Okay, cool. Thank you. That's all I want to know. Thank you very much.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with what's been said. It's not a garden centre, it's a supermarket, and it's going to be a bigger supermarket because of this. So the floor space that's being lost is non-heated polytunnels and non-heated cafe space, and it's going to expand the restaurant and cafe area at the back, the extension, which is going to mean there's more space for a bigger supermarket. It's got a butcher, it's got a bakery. You can get your whole weekly grocery shopping there. It is not a garden centre. And the point that Windlesham Parish Council have made in their objection is that it undermines the viability of business in Bagshot. So it undermines restaurants, cafes, and supermarkets, basically, supermarkets in Bagshot. It's an out-of-centre, unauthorised supermarket. I mean, I remember the planning history of this. Lots of applications came forward retrospectively. Is there any element of this that's retrospective as well? And can you comment, more than just saying it's a reduction in floor space, can you comment on the danger to the viability of business in Bagshot, like food retailers, groceries, and restaurants and cafes? Thanks.
I'll go back to the point that if we are looking at a reduction in floor space, therefore we can't demonstrate a harm to other retail centres. The other thing is the limitation on retail sales for food and drink is limited to 275 square metres from a previous permission. We've carried that over into one of the conditions on this permission just for belt and braces.
Thank you.
Councillor Rowlands.
Yes, Chairman. This probably follows on what's been previously said. Looking at the prescriptive list of things that should happen that they're actually selling, it raises a real question of what's actually going into the expansion they're proposing. And the suspicion, which I think is indicated by previous speakers, is that they're going to expand the whole restaurant or cafe procedures into areas that were not really envisaged in the first place.
So the cafe, the reductions in the cafe is 300 square metres, the extension is 320, and there's internal conversion of 170 square metres for the cafe. The shop extension is 380 square metres, but the polytunnel removal and the internal conversion takes you 870 square metres off.
Councillor Tedder.
Yes, I remember this one coming off for many years, and we've landed up with a shopping mall. This isn't a garden centre, as Councillor White said. This sells everything. It sells clothes. It sells double glazing. It sells insurance. It'll come out and service your gas boiler. It cuts hair. There is just nothing that's not in up there. So you have to admire him for his business. But this is Green Belt, and it keeps coming back and back and back, and we keep saying yes, yes, yes. And in the end, this is no longer Green Belt. This is a shopping mall. And if we do agree to this, I think we should put a condition on that there is no further development on that site. Because I can remember the ones coming from the Windlesham Golf Club, where this council was going to refuse an extension of something they'd already pulled down, and they weren't going to touch a blade of grass. So I think this is just about enough on this site, and we've really got to do something to call a halt, because if nothing else, the car park, as Councillor White says, it causes big problems. There isn't enough car parking space, and it's becoming to be a nightmare, and it does affect, I believe it does affect the shops in Bagshot.
Anybody else wish to make any comments? No? Okay, we have an officer recommendation to approve with conditions. Does anyone wish to propose? Councillor Thompson, second. Councillor Ashbury. All those in favour? Can you call out your names? Cliff Betton. David? David O'Mahony? Yes. Those against?
Chairman, should we do it on the microphone so we can hear at home?
Yes, all right then.
Okay, all those for the officer recommendation, please raise your hand. So we've got Councillor Cliff Betton, Councillor Kevin Thompson, Councillor Alan Ashbury, Councillor David O'Mahony. Anyone else? All those against? Councillor Sean Garrett, Councillor Murray Rowlands, Councillor Pat Tedder, Councillor Valerie White, Councillor Richard Wilson. And any abstentions? Councillor Ling Perrott and Councillor Liz Noble. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I guess that motion defeated. So, what are your planning reasons for turning that down? Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'd like to include the damage to the viability of local businesses elsewhere in Bagshot.
Can I advise members that is not a defendable reason? We've got to be very careful about what the reasons are for this application. We've heard from officers that there is no harm in terms of the green belt. There's a deficit in terms of the overall floor space. The visual harm, there's no visual harm in terms of this application. We have no evidence to actually substantiate in terms of the viability of other town centres as well. So we've got to be very mindful of the reasons that we give in terms of this application, so officers can actually defend it as a appeal.
Councillor Garrett, you wish to?
Yeah, so this is from the head rather than planning. So what we're effectively saying is we can knock down 4 polytunnels which were temporary structures, and we can now build a cafe. So it doesn't sit right with me, and I know that planning wise it's going to be obviously a struggle, but I've sat in this chamber a number of times for planning, and a number of times developers seem to be able to do one thing, which because it's temporary, we can't go back on that planning, and then suddenly we do something else. And at some point we need to put a foot down to say, look, and I go back to what Councillor Tedder said, maybe if we can't do anything about this one, then we need to say, look, that's it. Enough is enough. You can't keep building more. Now, I know you're going to say that that's not a planning consideration, but for the residents, and going back to what Councillor Wilson said is, this is turning into a supermarket, so that's affecting other businesses within a locale, okay? Can it be a planning consideration? No, but then are we hiding behind planning considerations to let things go through, which residents ultimately are not likely to be happy with? And that's a long-winded answer, and I know it doesn't give you any planning reasons, but that's from my head.
Yeah, I think unfortunately heart comes second to head when we're talking about planning and planning reasons and planning law and what we have to follow. Councillor Ashby.
Duncan wants to say something first.
Please, yeah.
Just on the point, it's not a temporary structure, it's a lawful building. So whilst you may think this sort of building is temporary, there is no limitation to remove it.
So just to clarification, how, if someone knows that they've got a massive site and they can build something that's not temporary, it's polytunnels, at some point, with knowing in the future they're going to take that down and put a cafe up, in this example, so we can give that consent all the time to these polytunnels, which ultimately could be taken down. I mean, I know I've sat in this chamber and seen so many different nurseries converted to other things. So, and I know we're going back to this planning issue, but I just want to understand this. So it wasn't a temporary structure, I get that, but it was built for a reason, and now it's not needed, and it's been taken down, and we're using that space to replace it with a cafe.
It had a lawful development certificate because it had been in place for a number of years. We treated it as a building under the law. We've gone through this argument in the last few committees. I dealt with one or two and was able to say that. So that means that it's a structure that's lawfully there, and therefore they can use that, if you like, because it's greenbelt, they know they're restricted. And as I say, and as I said through the presentation and subsequently, this is an overall reduction in built form on the site. Those structures, whether you feel that they are temporary structures, they're technically structures that are there. And also, when we talk about the scheme that we looked at previously, and we talked about the fact that it had been in place for well over 20, 30 years. So these things, whether they're temporary or not, can stay there for a lot longer. They obviously taken the view that they want to provide this in place of that, but there is, as I say, an overall reduction.
Gavin.
No, I just wanted to say to members, 7.3 of the report, page 177, there's quite an extensive amount of information on there on why the application is acceptable in Greenbelt terms. And I think members need to be mindful of that. Coming back to the point, can we put a hard line in terms of stopping any future applications? No, we can't, because it'll be subject to a further planning application, and then that will come in front of members, maybe, if it's called in, but officers will have to determine the actual changes in the Greenbelt harm in terms of that planning application. So I think members need to be very mindful of what's put in the report, and also the reduction in floor space and the Greenbelt harm overall.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson, then Councillor Tedder, then Councillor Noble.
Ashbury was first.
Oh yes, sorry Alan, you're so quiet.
Which, unlike me. I just wanted to clarify, we keep discussing whether this was a temporary. I think Duncan's answered it. My understanding was it wasn't temporary, it was planning and it was given. And I think the use of the word polytunnels has been a bit unfortunate, because we're thinking of a garden centre using small polytunnels to grow produce. These are not polytunnels, they are huge structures, having been there. So I think the use of the word polytunnel has potentially confused people into what they're thinking that is to be taken down.
Just to sort of reinforce that point, the polytunnel is used for retail uses. It's not used for the propagation of plants.
Thank you, Chair. Paragraph 7.6.1 under impact on retail centres. So it says paragraph 91 of the NPPF states that main town centre uses such as retail should be located in town centres, then in edge of centre locations, and only if suitable sites are not available should out of centre sites be considered. So is that a material reason to object to the application?
My view is not, because there's a reduction in built form.
And the point then is that sorry.
And also, members have to be mindful it's an extension to the existing cafe as well, which is an existing use on the site.
Yeah, but the floor space that's been lost is not the kind of floor space you could use for a supermarket, which is as we said, which is the main business of this site, because you can't have a supermarket in a polytunnel, you can't have a butcher in an unheated cafe space. So what's being lost in floor space, net floor space, is not usable for the retail that's going to cause the problem. So, you know, if it was more garden centre space, that would not impact the viability of businesses in Bagshot, but it's more cafe, restaurant, and it's going to be used as supermarket space and grocery shopping and white goods and things like that, and that is going to influence the viability of businesses in Bagshot. So although some floor space is being lost, it's not floor space that's causing a problem, but the floor space that's going to be gained is going to be causing the problem for viability of retail in Bagshot.
I think we can't speculate in terms of what it could be or can't be. The applicant has applied for an extension to the cafe, and that's what was determined in terms of the application. So members have to be mindful of that. So we can't speculate what it could be or could be used in the future.
But is 7.6.1 a valid reason then? I know it depends on how much weight you give to it, but
only looking at an actual extension, and the overall retail facility is already there, so it's not changing. All you're looking at is an extension, so it'd be unreasonable to go down that route, and the NPPF doesn't encourage that route. So actually all we have to look at is what the difference is in terms of the size. As Duncan's already explained, the existing polytunnel that you're losing already had a variety of uses within it. So having this enlarged cafe in practice does not make that much difference to the overall impact that you're actually having on the site. And indeed those impacts on other town centres, that impact would not be significant for those reasons.
Thank you, Duncan. And Councillor No. Councillor.
Oh, sorry, I think Councillor Tedder was first. Sorry. Thank you, Councillor Tedder. Thank you, Chair. Clause 3.6 on page 174 looks at the conditions imposed under the permissions limiting the garden centre, blah, 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 but it then goes on to say, and for 15% of the total floor area, pet food and sundries, books, potteries, glass, clothing, toys, and the provision of a coffee shop. So surely the coffee shop needs to be included in 15% of the turnover. And it says, and for a maximum area of 275 square metres for the sale of food and drink. The restaurant area is 322 metres. Have I misread this?
The 275 is the sale of food and drink under a retail use, not under the cafe use. So they're separate.
Sorry, but the 15% of total floor area with all those listing then, pet food and sundries, books, pottery, glass, clothing, toys, and the provision of a coffee shop, semicolon, would imply, does it not, that the 15% applies to all of those things and not just the coffee shop and not just...
Yes, but they're within that. It's a very large store. It's 5,000 square metres.
Okay.
Councillor Tedder.
Have we ever checked? And if we're going to remove the polytunnels, can we also say that they've got to remove the hard standing? Because when we think of green belt, we think more of green. This has got so much hard standing. I think the whole complete site is covered in hard standing. So if they're going to remove the polytunnels to have their cafe, then can we ensure that all the hard standing that is there to carry those polytunnels are also removed, so that they don't land up with yet another outside selling space?
I mentioned earlier in my presentation that the area to the rear is an open retail yard, and that's what it would become. They're just displacing it from the building, from where the polytunnel is, onto the building itself. So the extension of the building is in the same retail area, external retail area. So it's moving it from one location to another.
But it's still leaving the hard standing, so they can still then be part. So it's part of the sales area.
Yeah.
Because all they'll do.
Yes.
Sorry, all they'll do is take down the polytunnels and fill it with something else, pots or something, and it'll all be hard standing. So just because they've taken the cover off, they haven't actually removed it. So if they're going to take down the polytunnels, then they take away the hard standing.
I think we're getting away from reasons for refusal. I think your question about the hard standing, it covers the whole site. They've got raised beds and you've got trolleys full of plants. It's all hard standing.
Exactly. Just my point, Mr. Chairman, the whole site is covered in concrete. And
but it is what it is. So what are your reasons for refusing? Planning reasons. Silence. Do we have no planning reasons? In which case, why have we refused it?
How can I put it? I just wonder why we're here sometimes. These things are put in front of us to decide, and then we're told we can't decide. I know we've got the main issues to be considered in this application are impact on the green belt, where we're thinking it's overdevelopment in a green belt, but you're telling us it's not because they're removing certain things, so therefore you can add something else. The impact on the character and the appearance of the area, you're telling us that no one will see it, so it doesn't matter. Impact on a residential amenity, there is none. The only impact is on retail centres, which is Bagshot, and parking. And you're saying we can't object on that. So I ask the question again, why has this been put in front of us if we can't object to it?
Sorry, that is a question that I've asked many times in the past, but we are an integral part of the planning process. But it is the planning process. It's not NIMBY, it's not, I don't like the look of that, it's what are the planning reasons. And if we can't come up with planning reasons, then we have no reason to refuse it. At the last meeting, we had planning reasons regarding development of a site, 3 planning reasons. Councillor Noble.
Thank you, Chair. Clause 2.2 states that the overall floor space is 5,043 square metres, so 15% of that is 756 metres. If the cafe is 332, I can't see that they are actually within the 15%. In which case, isn't that a valid reason for objection?
They'll be limited by the conditions in place here. We're proposing to set out the same reasons that we've, the same conditions that we've done recently to limit how they use the space, that retail space. So if they're increasing the size of the cafe, they'll have to make the alterations within the store to limit the other elements of sales in that 15%.
Sorry, can we just check that the conditions actually state that they will have to reduce the size of the retail to less than 756, or can we apply a condition that the retail areas cannot exceed 756 metres?
We're using the same conditions as we previously have on a percentage basis.
Can we state it as a specific condition?
I'm not sure why we would, because we're just rolling forward the same conditions as the previous permission. So that would safeguard that provision going forwards. So I wouldn't really think we need that to be stated explicitly in the condition.
To my mind, there is no, that we've got a 5,000 figure stated at 2.2, we've got a 15% 50% stated further on, but the figure of 756 is not stated within the conditions, and I'd like it to be clarified.
I think that point is well made, and if we can clarify those numbers.
The 5,000 is for the existing main glass house. So with the extension, the percentages and the amounts related to the 15% will have to adjust as well.
So can we state the amount, the
Liz, I think we understand there's an issue with the numbers. Councillor Tedder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My point was similar to Councillor Noble's. Have the officers actually checked how much of the floor space is not actually part of the garden centre? When you count all the independent businesses up there, and all the places that aren't selling the plants, has any of the officers ever checked it?
I've assessed this application on its own merits. That's what I've had to do. Now, if there are issues around how they use the site more widely, then that's a matter that has to go through the corporate enforcement team.
Okay, thank you. Okay. We still have not come up with any planning reasons. You're asking the officers to go into battle without a shield, without any lances, and without any chainmail. And they will just get shot down by the planning inspector at cost to the council. And we do not have to take into account cost issues. But planning is planning. And if we go against the planning law, we could be in problems.
So what happens now, please?
That's a very good question. Do you want to reconsider your decision or not? In which case, we have refused it with no reason.
So, if I'm reading this right, based on everything else we've said, this wouldn't have come to us unless it's only come to us because a planning officer that worked for the council is now involved in this planning application, yes? So under normal circumstances, we would never have even seen this.
This is because the named agent for the application is an ex-planning officer of this council. It is a minor scheme which would normally have delegated authority, and it wasn't subject to a call-in.
Okay, thank you.
I believe we have some democratic advice.
So at this point, members, as per the Constitution, we've had a vote on the officer's recommendation. We've also had a look at an alternative proposal, which I think it would be fair to say there isn't an obvious alternative proposal coming forward which we can vote on. What I would suggest is we reconsider the original officer's recommendation, however, also have a think about potential conditions or informatives which could be added, which makes the original recommendation more acceptable.
You may.
I've only been doing this for 5 years now and I'm still learning. So, based on the conversation we had about the 15%, which I know is and I don't know if we can do it as a condition, but can we make a recommendation that enforcement checks whether the 15% is a valid amount? And that's a very small thing, but that's an area where we have concerns. So is there a recommendation or some way we can, because obviously we're all part of the same council, is there something we can do to make that happen?
Gavin?
I suppose that would only come into play if there was like actually a breach in the future, and then the corporate enforcement team would go on site to investigate. I think at this moment in time we can't really speculate about that.
But I think we all believe that it's already more than 15%. So at what point does someone say there's a breach? If I said to you, having visited the place, I think it's more than 15%, is that enough for me to get an enforcement done?
Yeah, so if basically, if how the corporate enforcement team works is if the general public wants to cite any planning breaches, they would contact them, and then the officers would go on site to investigate it. So that's how the process works.
Okay.
Yeah.
So where does that leave us? Councillor Wilson, you have a point?
Yeah, just following on from the recommendation from the Democratic Services Officer, could we change one of the conditions to reduce the amount of floor space allowed for the sale of food and drink to a smaller number, and approve the proposal based on there'll be an increase in the cafe and restaurant, so that's going to increase the business for that, but then presumably reduce it a bit for the food supermarket, and overall that would balance out, and they would have an increase in business, but it would skew it more towards either being a garden centre or being a cafe and restaurant, which would benefit the viability of food and drink retail in Bagshot.
Jonathan?
Apologies. Yeah, the problem is when that condition was originally worded, it was based on retail evidence, and it was supported by retail experts who gave you that information or came to that conclusion why a certain amount was acceptable. You can't then just decide, oh, well, we're going to change that amount without having all that evidence to back up what you're actually doing there. But it comes down to, again, that the actual extension here is not making a significant difference to the overall build you've got there. But if you have concerns over the overall build, which is a separate matter from this particular planning application, then indeed you can go down that request for corporate enforcement to investigate it.
So if we did change the condition without the evidence and approved the application, what would be the consequences? I mean, the Chair has explained the consequences of refusing the application without material planning reasons. So if we change the condition without the evidence that you talked about, the retail evidence, and approve the planning application, what would happen or could happen?
In the same way that you can appeal against refusal, you can also appeal against the imposition of a condition. So that would also put us at risk from an appeal on that. Just following on from what John Partington just said about how it has been assessed previously, and at that point was assessed against the retail impact. So I think there would be concerns about that from that perspective.
And are there any other conditions that you can suggest that would make the application more likely for us to approve?
I think currently, in terms of the officer's advice in the report and what's been published, we're of the view that, the greenbelt harm has been balanced out in terms of the reduction of the polytunnels and built form. That's the first point. There's no impacts in terms of amenity to residents. There's no parking issues as well. You've got to take that all into the context. What is the harm we're looking to actually protect here? There is no harm from this application, from what's been published in the report, and we need to cite that what is the harm of actually putting these conditions. I think if you impose these conditions as part of the application, the applicant could, as Mr. Carty has actually said, can actually appeal against that those conditions being imposed, and it's likely that we would lose because there's no harm in terms of development coming forward.
Councillor White, then Councillor Noble.
You said earlier on that we can't condition that there be no more development on this site. Can we condition that any more planning applications come to committee? I know you all go, oh no, because you thought this was going to be a quick one.
Well, I am.
So if there's any future planning applications on this site which is submitted as a ward councillor, you can obviously call it into committee, and then that is your opportunity to consider the application in a public domain as part of the committee process.
Thank you. Councillor Noble.
Thank you, Chair. Exception or item 6 on page 180 in the conditions. Except for the retail sales allowed by conditions 5 above and 7 below, the garden centre shall only be used for the retail sale of pet food and sundries, books, pottery, glass, clothing, toys and the provision of a coffee shop and no other purpose. The retail floor space provided for the retail sales allowed by this condition shall only be provided on no more than 15% of the total floor area of the main glass house building in Class E. What's the size of the main glass house building, please? And can we include the size of the main glass house building as an amendment to this condition? And the reason for that is, if you look at the reason, it says to ensure that the proposal would not have an adverse impact on the vitality and viability of local retail centres, which my fellow councillors are obviously concerned about in their wards.
Sorry, Councillor, I was thinking about, while you're reading that condition that's imposed, I think we may have given the wrong emphasis on that. I just wanted to clarify so you knew, and the councillors knew what that condition was meaning. The 15% limitation doesn't include the coffee shop. The way, just reading that condition again, it is the retail floor space limitation, the 15%, relates to the retail sales of pet food and sundries, books, pottery, glass, clothing and toys. Because the retail floor space provided for the retail sales allowed by this condition shall only be provided on no more than 15% of the total floor area of the main glasshouse building. So the way I read it is that, setting aside the coffee shop, the 15% relate to the retail sales set out in that condition.
It does say on the third line, and the provision of a coffee shop in the same sentence, so I think that's misleading.
Yeah. Well, it is a historic condition, and maybe that could be tweaked, but what it's saying is that it is the retail floor space the 15% limitation relates to. That's my reading of it.
But in the line above, the definition of retail sales includes provision of a coffee shop.
It's the word and the provision of a coffee shop and for no other purpose.
But there's no comma after toys.
If we're coming down to punctuation, it does start to get a little bit...
Does the word and come after toys? Or so you don't have a comma?
In which case, and the provision of a coffee shop is part of the same clause.
I don't think it is. I don't think it means that, Councillor.
And I think we're getting off the topic.
I think far from being off the topic, we're actually on topic.
Councillor Wilson.
So just to clarify, 15% of the floor space of the main glass house can be used to sell the list, including pet food. As well as that, there can be a coffee shop of any size. And as well as that, there can be up to 275 square metres selling food and drink.
These are the limitations that were on the building as it stands, and these have been brought over for belt and braces. That's a point I know, a point I raised earlier, and that is what we're working with. And it's when you wish seeking to tweak, vary, tighten up these conditions that we're concerned that these have gone through the processes on previous applications. Again, going back to what Mr. Partington said about the retail impact has been assessed previously. And I think it's difficult to see if you're shrinking down these spaces that they can use either limited to condition 6 or 7. It's a more dangerous area because they can appeal that.
Yeah, I just wanted to check, because I think you're right. I think we were misunderstanding what the 15% was. So it's 15% for the list, including pet food. Aside from that, a coffee shop of any size. And in addition to that, 275 square metres for food and drink. Thanks.
Okay. Where have we got to? We still have to come up with some planning reasons, or we refuse the application and wait for the appeal, which we will lose.
Sorry, Chair. Or we change the conditions without the evidence, and then, as you said, there might be an appeal for that as well.
Is there a time limit that we must deal with this application?
Do you mean a sort of extension of time? Yeah, we need to determine it by next Thursday.
One meeting only, please.
So, obviously, we have an issue with the retail, and we'd like that reviewed, and we understand we can't have it as a condition. So, can we defer the application, get the retail size checked and evidenced, and then come back with that evidence? Sorry, in which case, sorry.
Yeah.
Great minds think alike, or not, as the case may be.
I don't know about great. Can we come, in the light of all of the opposition and the uncertainty about the decision that was taken, and we did take that decision, can we now defer and bring it back? Does time allow us to do that?
In terms of just that point, we need to meet the target time. We need to determine it next week, by next Thursday. But I think Gavin might come in on the issue of retail impact, I think. I'm not sure whether you were going to.
I think, as advised by Mr. Partington, there was obviously a historic retail impact assessment which was undertaken as part of this application. Not as part of this application, historically I'm talking about here. And we're only asking for the retail impact assessment based on this extension to this cafe to be considered. That's what we're considering here. Just that element of the nursery, which doesn't cause any harm in terms of the green belt and also the amenity. My view on that is quite unreasonable in terms of putting the applicant through that expense and actually going through that piece of work to assess an element of the development which effectively has no harm in terms of green belt or the amenity of the locality in its entirety.
Councillor Tedder, and then I think we have to take a decision whether we like it or not.
Having just heard what Mr. Chennai said, does that mean that every time one of these have sneaked in, we have not looked at the whole picture, and that we, as council, have been negligent because we have I see that the note of the original big glass house, but if you look at the site, there's so many bits added on that it has been a bit like Topsy, and just like this one, Mr. Chennai says you can only look at this bit. So has this been a way that perhaps we as a council should look at the planning, that we look at the overall picture, as we do with houses? You can only have it so big on the original house, because this has just grown and grown and grown. This is Topsy, and I think this is probably a mess of our own making.
I think in terms of that point, and Mr. Carty did raise this at the beginning of his presentation as case law in terms of consideration of polytunnels, and there's been previous applications which has been heard in this committee recently for a new dwelling where they offset the polytunnels in terms of the built form to actually allow I think it was a bungalow to be permitted. So we need to take that all in the round. I get the point over time the nursery has grown, but also all these elements are lawful. And what they're doing is that they're taking elements away so they can actually build this extension. And so they're offsetting the harm against the greenbelt overall. If they came in with a future application in the future to extend it and they didn't have the actual volume or floor space, then obviously that would we would assess it against the greenbelt harm accordingly and maybe refuse the application. But currently, in what's in front of us, the application is offsetting against the polytunnels to allow this extension to this building.
Please, yeah.
I think some members will know this, but for everybody's benefit, just to say that the history that's set out in the papers tonight is a limited history. It has had extensive history, this site, just so that you know. That was relating, the relevant history is for that purpose. It relates to the development that's proposed, but the history goes way, way back, and I think some members will know that anyway. But just for completeness, I thought I'd let you know.
Okay. Unless it's substantially going to pull a rabbit out of a hat.
I propose that we change the condition 7 to 200 square metres for food and drink, and then pass the application.
Can we do that?
Sorry, Councillor Wilson. Sorry, Councillor Wilson. It somewhat comes back to my earlier point. We can't just arbitrarily reduce it to a certain amount that we deem acceptable without evidence or explanation as to why we think that's an acceptable amount to reduce it by. That 275 is there for a reason.
Yeah, I understand, but we've got three options. One is to approve it, and we voted against that. One is to reject it without material planning reasons, and we've been advised against that. And the other one is to change the condition and approve it. And I mean, we're advised against that, I guess, too, but it seems like the least likely to cause major problems later.
Councillor Teddy, you had a point?
Yeah, yes. If we're going to approve it, can we put in a condition that says the polytunnels have got to come down within X number of months or whatever's deemed reasonable, and all the hard standing that they stand on is removed? Because if they're trading one off against the other, let's clear it right off the site.
Can we condition it clears before they start work on the cafe?
Council, we can add a condition that the buildings, those structures that are to be removed, are removed. But we're going to about the hard standing bit.
Yeah, but including the hard standing, because that is part of the building.
The site has got hard standing. I don't know what we'll gain from that, because this is an outdoor rear yard that has hard standing around it. I don't know what we'll gain from not having hard standing in it.
Because this is something that they've said we're going to do away with it, and we're going to do this instead. Now, we don't like doing it, but we've said we've got to do it. So if that's what they're trading in, if we're trading,
we've lost someone. Yeah. So until he comes back. Can't mess with nature. Although sometimes you'd like. What's left between them?
Just to make it clear for everyone at home.
A good idea from Eddie. 5 minutes break. Okay. Back at 1:15 by my clock anyway. We have debated this quite a bit, and as a consequence of that, I think we have come to a potential, I say potential way out, in that if we can amend the recommendation, have another vote taking into account all the debate that we've heard, I think that would lead us somewhere. So could we have the recommendation for?
Looking again at condition 4, that condition requires the removal of the extensions annotated as restaurant seating area on the submitted drawings, and the polytunnel, which is shown on a number of drawings, proposed to be removed, shall be removed prior to the construction of the development hereby approved. We want to add to that reason the following sentence. It must be demonstrated within 6 months of occupation of the extension hereby approved. Sorry, I'm scribbling, I'm amending as I go, I do apologise. That those structures have been demolished and the land made good.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. And can we just have clarification and the land made good? Thank you.
We've put the image on the screen of the aerial photo. I just want to highlight the right-hand aerial photo, which shows how the land, that area is used currently around between the glass house and the polytunnel. I think we would expect it to have a similar appearance. I believe that there are probably raised beds with areas to walk around those raised beds. Or low level, yeah.
Okay, members, we've had a lot of debate. We've learned a little, we've gained a lot, and we've got a changed amendment. Could I have someone to propose, again, a vote on we accept the officer recommendation with the altered amendment? Anyone? Happy to propose again. Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Thank you, Councillor Ashbury. All those in favour, please raise your hands.
This is all those in favour of voting for the recommendation to grant subject to conditions with the amended condition 4 as read out previously by the case officer. So 4, we have Councillor Sean Garrett, Councillor Cliff Betton, Councillor Ling Perrott, Councillor Liz Noble, Councillor David O'Mahony, Councillor Murray Rowlands, Councillor Kevin Thompson, Councillor Alan Ashbury. Any more? So those now against.
Against.
Councillor Pat Tedder, Councillor Valerie White, and Councillor Richard Wilson. Any abstentions? No abstentions.
Thank you, members. We now move on to what should have been or could have been the first item on the agenda. First application on the agenda. And please bear in mind the discussions that we've just had with regard to planning reasons while we discuss this new application. Neville, nothing to worry about.
Thank you, Chair. The application site relates to the land east of Four Oaks Nursery, which is situated on the eastern side of Hyams Lane, outside of the settlement boundaries within the Greenbelt. The proposal is for the change of use of land for 2 gypsy and traveller pitches, comprising the siting of 2 mobile homes, 2 touring caravans, the erection of 2 ancillary utility rooms, together with the installation of an area of hard standing and soft landscaping. There is an update to report as per the update paper, following the amendment to the Planning Policy for Traveller Sites document in December 2023 and subsequent revision of the planning definition of gypsy and travellers. The Council requires an additional 3 pitches for gypsies and travellers that meet the planning definition. This does not change the overall need numbers, rather the change results in 3 pitches being moved from the category of those who do meet the definition into those who do, from those who do not meet the definition into those that do meet the definition. As a result, there are minor changes to the figures referenced in paragraph 7.4.5 to 7.4.8. The site is accessed via an existing vehicle path from Hyams Lane. Currently, it contains a sand school, stables building, and an area of hard standing occupied by unauthorised touring caravans and tent-like structures. The touring caravans, tent-like structures, and part of the area of hard standing are subject to an enforcement notice, pending consideration of this application. As shown on the image to the right, the dashed pink line illustrates the 400-metre buffer zone of the Thames Basin Heath Special Protection Area. The existing development described falls within this buffer zone to the north of the line. The site lies within flood zone 1, indicating a low risk of flooding. The site is not clearly visible from public vantage points or neighbouring residential properties. Open fields lie to the north and east, whilst the M3 motorway is situated to the east and south of the site, obstructing views from those directions. The aerial view highlights the extent of the existing hard standing and sand school, as well as the absence of residential development in the immediate surrounding area. The image to the right shows the access road into the site, which is clearly made. The image to the left shows the extent of the existing sand school and the size of the stables building, whilst the image to the right shows the various unauthorised caravans in the background. These images depict the existing hard standing area on the site and the location of the various structures. The surrounding context is visible where there is an absence of residential development. Mature trees along the boundaries of adjacent fields contain and enclose the wider site area. The proposal seeks to install a hard standing area in the southern portion of the site to accommodate 2 gypsy and traveller pitches. Each pitch would comprise 2 static caravans, 2 touring caravans, 2 utility box, associated posted rail fencing and landscaping. This development would relocate the caravans outside of the 400-metre buffer zone of the SPA, with only the site's access falling within the buffer. As part of the proposal, a significant portion of the existing northern hard standing area, along with the existing stand school, would be removed and restored to its natural state. This restoration would be secured by a landscaping condition that would include tree and hedge planting. Additionally, all unauthorised structures would be removed from the site. The proposal would result in development on greenfield land within the Greenbelt, which is considered inappropriate development, attracting substantial weight against it. There would also be some harm to the rural character of the area, despite the absence of public vantage points to the site. Future occupiers would also rely heavily on private vehicle use due to the site's location relative to local services and facilities. However, the Council cannot demonstrate a 5-year supply of deliverable sites, having a significant overall shortfall of 63 pitches. Despite extensive efforts to identify suitable sites, including engaging with neighbouring authorities, this has not reduced the overall need, as other authorities face similar challenges in delivering sites. To illustrate the difficulty, of the 3 sites providing a maximum of 25 pitches identified in the Regulation 18 Preferred Options paper, approximately 20 of those 25 pitches may now be undeliverable. Therefore, even accounting for the potentially deliverable site, there would still be a significant shortfall of 58 pitches. In line with paragraph 27 of the Planning Policy for Traveller Sites, this unmet need and lack of deliverable sites should be given significant weight. Given this supply constraint, the Council cannot suggest any alternative sites for the 2 families, which include children. It is long established that the best interest of the children represents a primary consideration, i.e., no other consideration can be regarded as inherently more important. Refusing this application... Have we got it as well? Refusing this application would subject the applicants to roadside existence, causing significant distress to the children's educational and medical needs, contrary to their best interests. Therefore, the lack of alternative sites and the family's personal circumstances are given significant weight in favour of the proposal. The PPTS outlines that local authorities should determine applications for any Gypsy and travellers, and not just those with a local connection. The proposal has clear parallels to the recent appeal decision allowed on Philpott Lane, which is a material consideration in making this decision. I refer members to a copy of this decision in Annex A, page 29 of the committee report. In both cases, the proposal was considered inappropriate development within the Greenbelt, causing harm to the character of the surrounding area, as well as being unsustainably located in transport terms. The inspector attributes substantial weight to the harm to the Greenbelt. However, only limited weight was given to the harm to the area's character of the area. This was because the site fell outside of the direct public vantage point, similar to the current proposal. See paragraph 19 and 25 of the appeal decision. Limited weight was also assigned to the harm caused by dependence on private vehicle use, with the provision of a settled base offsetting the impact of alternative roadside existence. See paragraph 29 of the appeal decision. The inspector also gave significant weight to the unmet need for Gypsy and traveller pitches, which at the time was a 59 pitch shortfall. If you see paragraph 47 of the decision. This shortage has now risen to 63 pitches overall. Additionally, significant weight was given to the lack of certainty regarding future pitch supply, with the inspector acknowledging that the 3 potential allocated sites would not meet the identified need over the planned period. See paragraph 45 of the decision. Since the inspector's decision, it has become evident that 2 of those potentially identified sites may be undeliverable, further constraining the future supply position since the appeal decision. It was considered highly likely that windfall sites in the Greenbelt would be required. Sorry about that. I'll just go back a little bit. The inspector also gave significant weight to the unmet need for Gypsy and traveller pitches, which at the time was a 59 pitch shortfall. See paragraph 47 of the appeal decision. This shortage has now risen to 63 pitches overall. Additionally, significant weight was given to the lack of certainty regarding future pitch supply, with the inspector acknowledging that the 3 potential allocated sites would not meet the identified need over the planned period. See paragraph 45 of the appeal decision. Since the inspector's decision, it has become evident that 2 of those potentially identified sites may be undeliverable, further constraining the future supply position since the decision was made. It was considered highly likely that windfall sites in the Greenbelt, such as this, would be required to help meet the Council's unmet need. See paragraph 62 of the appeal decision. Significant weight in line with Article 8 of the Human Rights Act was also attributed to the best interests of the children involved. See paragraphs 48 to 53 of the appeal decision. In both cases, without alternative sites, the families would be subjected to roadside existence. The inspector considered that the benefits of a settled base for the children's educational needs and the family's medical welfare weighed significantly in favour of the proposal under Article 8, see paragraph 63 of the appeal decision. Given the weighting the inspector assigned to these matters and the similarities between the two proposals, significant material weight should be given in support of the current application. The application has demonstrated significant material considerations that favour granting permission. These include the combination of the unmet need for gypsy and traveller sites, the lack of available alternative sites, and ensuring the best interests of the children involved. Collectively, these factors outweigh the substantial harm that would occur to the greenbelt, the limited harm to the character and appearance of the surrounding area, and the limited harm resulting from the dependence on private vehicle usage. The benefit of the application site is that it is situated away from public vantage points, which reduces any potential visual and activity impact, whilst there is no harm to neighbouring occupiers. The application is also supported with no objections from any technical consultees, as well as Surrey County Highways and Natural England. Consequently, it is recommended that planning permission be granted due to the significant weight attributed to the factors supporting the proposal, consistent with the appeal decision allowed at the Oaks Farm site. Thank you.
Thank you, Neville. Members, before we start, included in the information pack is some confidential information. If you've got it printed out, it's pages 55 to 67. If anybody is going to refer to the information in those pages in any question or in any way, we need to go into closed session excluding press and public. If you're not going to refer to those, we can carry on as we are. Anybody going to refer to those? No? No? Okay. Well, thank you. And the second thing, just bear in mind what we've just spent half an hour talking about. Councillor Garrett, you were first.
Thank you. Clarification, really, to be fair. So the site has currently got an enforcement case on it, I think you said, yeah? By moving the site into outside the 400 metre buffer zone, that means that obviously isn't a relevant case. Does that mean that those aren't official numbers at the moment, but they would be if they moved into outside the 400 metre buffer zones? It adds to our numbers for G&T sites. That's a question. Does it mean they are then included in our numbers for G&T sites by moving them into the outside the buffer zone? Does that make sense? Because they're not in our numbers now because they're there unofficially, but by moving them into the 400 outside the zone, that means they are official, which means that they get added to our numbers. That's the first question. And the second one, on the drawing you showed us, one of the first slides, it shows you the difference between the site now and the site in the future. There, at on the drawing on the left-hand side, there's a building that stays, or a site. Is that still a caravan? Is it a building? Because obviously that would still be inside the buffer zone, which means that would still be an issue. Do they both make sense?
Yeah, it's a bit of a confusing situation around the need, but so the way that our need gets calculated is when the GTAA comes out and it considers those who meet the planning definition and as well as those who don't meet the planning definition. So this family is currently included within that number. By approving this scheme today, we would reduce that number by 2 pitches. So we'd have a 61 shortfall of pitches. In terms of the building that's remaining, so we've got the sand school and much of the hard standing that's removed, but there would be the stables building that's existing and has been existing for some time that would be remaining, and that would allow them the storage of horses for personal reasons.
Are they allowed, because of the buffer zone, are they allowed the horses because of the buffer zone?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I think we don't have any other option except to approve this, and for the reasons that have been given. The precedent about the Philpott Lane application, that one, there was a difference because that one was in a flood zone, and despite that, and despite the inspector having that to weigh heavily against, it said heavily weighs against the appeal. He still allowed the appeal, albeit on a temporary basis. So I think we have no choice but to approve it, and the unmet need is the main reason. And I mean, there's the interest of the child as well. But if we had GRT provision elsewhere in the borough, that would be an option. So we don't, and one of the reasons we don't is because the Mindenhurst development was approved years and years ago without any GRT pitch provision, and I think that was taken as a short-term political decision and not in the long-term interests of the borough, because we've got this, as we've heard, we've got this impossible to meet need. So we're going to have more applications like this, which this application does cause harm to the Greenbelt. And the other one that was approved did cause harm to the Greenbelt as well. And we're going to have more of that, and we're going to have more unsustainable locations like this one. But I think that's the position we're in, and it's the least worst case action to take. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, it was just a point of clarification, and I appreciate this is probably in the report, so apologies. But just to be clear, so on my understanding, there's a family currently residing above the purple line on your screen, and we're talking about moving that same family into an authorised pitch below. Is it an extended pitch, i.e. are we increasing the capacity, in which case another family is likely to join them, or is it simply a case of moving, I mean, I appreciate in the future, who knows who would be there, but I'm talking about at this moment in time, we're talking about moving the one family into the new pitch, and that's where we're at. Is that what we're deciding?
There's currently 2 families in touring caravans on the northern part of the pitch, and they'll be coming down to the southern part on a permanent
The same
base.
2 families?
Same
yeah,
two
okay.
families.
Councillor Tedder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As unfortunately Councillor Wheeler isn't here this evening, and she's asked me to read this, and this has been the Democratic Services are aware. This is a statement from Ward Councillor reflecting conversations with residents who did not feel able to raise objections themselves. It is understood that the proven needs of a family, particularly education and access to health and welfare service, is a basic human right and should be a primary consideration in determining this application. It is, however, also accepted that gypsy and traveller pitches are harmful in the Greenbelt and should not be approved unless very special circumstances exist. The officer, in determining this application, is using the very special circumstances as a reason for approval.
Okay, I think if Councillor Tedder tries now, and I'm hoping having both microphones on, will cancel out the problem.
Okay. Very special circumstances as a reason for approval, particularly given the recent appeal decision for the application site in Philpott Lane, Chobham. The site approval given by the inspector in that case, Philpott Lane, has different circumstances and relates to a single family with small children within the curtilage of the outskirts of the village. The decision notes that the appellant had lived within 3 miles of the appeal site all of his life, and this was a consideration in the judge's summing up. The judge also concluded that there was no evidence to persuade me that Greenbelt harm arising from this site would be greater than any other site that might be allocated. This site is not adjacent to the SPA buffer zone. Even taking into consideration the 3 miles, needs of the children and the human rights of the family, the judge only awarded temporary permission. In order for the borough to identify alternative sites and for those identified to come forward, he concluded that temporary personal permission would represent a fair and proportionate balance between the family on the one hand and the control of development in the public interest on the other. The guidance for consideration is, as always with planning applications, open to interpretations. We would like to draw the committee's attention to a number of paragraphs for guidance. Inappropriate development is harmful in the green belt and should not be approved except in very special circumstances. Traveller sites, temporary or permanent, in the green belt are inappropriate development, subject to the best interests of the child, personal circumstances, and unmet need are likely to clearly outweigh harm in the green belt and any other harm so as to establish very special circumstances. Local planning authorities should very strictly limit new traveller sites development in open countryside that is away from existing settlements or outside areas allocated in the development plan. Local planning authorities should ensure that sites in rural areas respect the scale of and do not dominate the nearest settled community and avoid placing undue pressure on the local infrastructure. If a local planning authority cannot demonstrate an up-to-date 5-year supply of deliverable sites, this should be a significant material consideration in any subsequent planning decision when considering applicants for the grant of temporary planning permission. The justification for this approval, which is adjacent to the SPA, is the special needs of the children of one family. However, this applicant covers two families. Members will be able to see that there is a registered address for both families that relate to an alternative location which is close to where the families have medical care registered and school provision within the confidential papers. We would therefore argue that the very special circumstances are not proved, as we have no evidence that the families who have not been resident on the site for the last 6 months and therefore must have accommodation elsewhere, do not have alternative, albeit less attractive, place to live, where the children are close to the school and their GP. It is expected that the officer will come back on this. However, it could be argued that the burden of proof of need should sit with the applicant to prove and not the council to disapprove. The applicants have not been living on site for the last 6 months. The other joint applicant has adult children. These adult children are eligible to apply for
Excuse me, Chair, point of order. Should we be going into closed session? Is this confidential information?
Eddie did check it. He was conversant with before. 18. As yet, we are limiting this site to 2 pitches when we know that there is already a need for 4. We're not satisfied that the bar for very special circumstances for this family has been reached, and again point members to the address indicated in the confidential papers and that the application site has had a period of around 6 months when the family was not resident. We are yet to receive an air quality report. We do not understand how, in all consciousness, we can determine an application when the recommendation is that prior to commencement, an air quality assessment be completed. Are we confident that we are not subjecting children to unsafe levels of nitrogen dioxide? Air quality report requires that prior to commencement, the model predicted concentration of nitrogen dioxide, NO2, is likely to be in excess of the air quality national objectives and indicated to be greater than 45 UG/M3. This has not been provided, and I am surprised that as a council, particularly bearing in mind the reason for refusal at the last planning application meeting which concerned this site, suggested condition. Prior to commencement of the development, an air quality assessment shall be submitted and approved by the local planning authority. The assessment should demonstrate that the national air quality objectives would not be exceeded at the proposed development. Where any objective is exceeded, a scheme of mitigation shall be submitted and approved by the local planning authority and retained. Reason: to safeguard the health of the future occupiers in accordance with paragraph 192 of the NPPF. We would suggest that the application is refused for the following reasons. Given that the applicants have not been resident on the site during a normal period of residence outside of the additional horse fair period, during term time, that very special circumstances have not been demonstrated, as they evidently have alternative accommodation. Only one applicant has children of school age, and the other applicant has failed to demonstrate any special circumstances and has also evidently been resident elsewhere, and it is not possible to determine the applicants separately. We must refuse this application as there is no special circumstances. As an air quality report has not been undertaken and cannot be undertaken prior to development, as there is already unlawful development on site, we should not approve the application for living conditions that could be harmful to children. Reference report. It is considered best practice to provide an air quality assessment at the application stage that sets out the impacts to future residents occupying the site. Scrutiny of the assessment by EH would ensure confidence in any decision. Condition 11 in the officer report requests this prior to commencement, but commencement has already occurred. That there is no provision within the application before us for mitigating measures to ensure that there is no harm to the integrity of the TBS SPA, and that there is no unilateral undertaking as a deed pursuant to section 106 to secure a financial contribution towards measures to mitigate harm. It says that there will be one prior to determination in 7.8.3, page 13. But there is no confirmation that this has been secured and agreed. Can the officer please confirm whether this is an agreement in place? Should the committee see fit to support the officer's recommendation, then I would request that the following conditions prior to commencement or occupation. The planning application, in line with the inspector's report for the Oaks, be approved for a temporary personal permission for 3 years, as temporary personal permission would represent a fair and proportionate balance between the family on one hand and the control of development in public interest on the other. We would also ask representations that have been received from residents that burning has taken place on site, that multiple vehicles have been on site, and that a history of discarding planning regulations, hence the outstanding enforcement notice, that the following conditions are imposed so that the peaceful, verdant nature of the area can be maintained, and so that there will be protection against possible neighbour conflict. Commercial vehicles, no more than one commercial vehicle per pitch shall be kept on the land for use by the occupiers of the caravans hereby permitted, and they shall not exceed 3.5 tonnes in weight. Reason: in the interest of visual amenity of the area and to accord with guidance in the NPPF and planning policy for traveller sites, to protect the integrity of the SPA as entrance to the site is within the buffer zone. No commercial activities shall take place on the land, including the storage of materials, and no burning of materials should take place within any pitch. Reason, in the interest of visual amenity of the area, to protect residential amenity and to accord with guidance in the NPPF and planning policy for traveller sites to protect the integrity of the SPA. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Pavel.
Thank you. There's quite a few points to go through, but I think it's important to start with the application at Philpott Lane and the comparison between the two applications. I mean, I'll go back to the previous slide. Both sites are in the Greenbelt, both sites were considered inappropriate, both sites considered harmful to the character of the area, and both sites had limited harm owing to the poor sustainable location. Where the inspector considered temporary permission, this was ultimately down to the flood risk element. You know, that site sat on a floodplain, flood zone 3, and in that case, even where it was determined that there was no safe access or exit from the site in the event of a flood event, permission was granted. So if we didn't have that flood risk element, I believe that permanent permission would have been granted in that instance. It's also important to recognise that as part of that decision, the inspector recognised that with 73% of the Greenbelt, 73% of the land outside of the settlement boundaries falling within the Greenbelt, it was very likely that any sites coming forward would fall within the Greenbelt. And therefore, when you assess the harm on that site or on this site or any other Greenbelt site, it would not be any greater. So it's important to bear that Philpott Lane decision in mind. The other point to raise with that decision is at that point, when the inspector was considering the shortfall of 59 pitches, we had identified 3 potential sites in our draft local plan. Since that decision was made, we've now acknowledged that two of those sites have fallen away. Therefore, out of those 25 pitches that we potentially had contributing to our unmet need, we now only have 5 potentially contributing to our unmet need. So there's a significant difference in terms of the shortfall again. Just to highlight again as well, we've gone through the sort of evidence process in terms of the call for sites, engaged with neighbouring boroughs as well, and there's been no other sites that we've been able to identify. So ultimately, I think we will be needing to require windfall sites in the Greenbelt, as that inspector alluded to. The inspector would have also had regard to the PPTS, so where the statements were made in terms of the unmet need and personal circumstances not equating to very special circumstances to outweigh the harm to the Greenbelt. This is something that the inspector considered in that decision and still considered that a permission was acceptable in that instance. It's been raised in respect of the residents not being at the site currently. We've had no evidence of the contrary. The only evidence to say otherwise is a postal address to which the letters are addressed to. It would make complete and appropriate sense for post to be received at a different address whilst they are not currently on an unauthorised site. In respect of the schools, again, we've had no other evidence to the contrary that the children have not attended the schools that they have said in the personal circumstances letter. Turning to the commercial activities, just to put a bit of context, there's an existing sand school and stable in the northern part of the site, which have been there for some time. The applicant hasn't applied for any commercial uses and is proposing to reduce the area of hard standing and remove the sand school, highlighting that there'd be no training of the horses, for example. If there were to be any commercial activity, this would need to be a matter of fact and degree, which planning enforcement would be able to consider. However, as it is not being applied for, it doesn't appear reasonable to consider on a speculative basis. In terms of the living conditions of the children, whilst we we have to consider the noise and air quality in relation to the M3. I mean, ultimately, we've got conditions recommended in the report to deal with those matters. In the first instance, it's also important to recognise that when we talk about the noise and air quality situation, this isn't an issue of noise or pollution impact from surrounding residents, which would typically be the case when we talk about these issues. The proposal also doesn't result in any excessive noise or pollution generation to warrant an objection. We also have no objections from the Council's environmental health officers, who are the experts on this matter. Based on the predicted pollutions data and DEFRA's published calculator, it is the environmental health officer's opinion that the site should meet national air quality objectives. The proposed suggested condition would ensure this. In terms of noise, the caravans are able to be fitted out with noise insulation measures and fittings that would ensure that the residents have an adequate noise environment, as well as the caravans having appropriate ventilation. In terms of the sustainability of the site, which was mentioned, it is recognised that it's not an ideal location in respect of local services and facilities. However, we have to consider the flip side, the alternative, which would be roadside existence, which would result in more trips and more unsustainable patterns of travel. Again, this was a similar concern in the Oaks Farm decision, where the inspector considered that the balance with the roadside alternative and gave it limited weight. The access to the site also raised no issues, and no objections have been raised from highways. In terms of the legal agreement, we would apply the bespoke SANG and SAM payment, which is something that we've done on other applications for caravan sites. I'm not sure if I'm missing anything.
Thanks. I'd like to add something about the nitrogen dioxide. Nitrogen dioxide is formed mainly in diesel engines, and it's formed when they're idling. It's incomplete combustion. There are plenty of houses in Camberley that are just as close to the motorway as this site is. You may recall I spoke about pollution in relation to the South Circular Road in London. The World Health Organization limit of 40 micrograms per cubic metre of air is set to protect the health of children with respiratory illness in cities where diesels are idling. On the motorway, they tend not to idle unless in case of accident. The 40 micrograms per cubic metre is based on constant inhalation, 24 hours a day in inner cities. It is not relevant to this site and this application, especially when you consider that modern diesel engines, the limits were set many years ago. Modern diesel engines inject urea into the exhaust gas that, when it's present, reacts with the NO2 to give you water and nitrogen. Nitrogen comprises 80% of our atmosphere. Stops us all bursting into flames, basically. So that is not relevant to this instance. There may be other things, but NO2 is not one of them. So, anybody else like to make a comment?
Sorry, if I could just add, because there was the point regarding the increased need from the children. I mean, this is no different to a family moving into the borough in bricks and mortar accommodation, who would then need to be considered within the housing land supply. We need to determine the application based on the current position and not speculate on any potential future need. We also need to be mindful of the public sector equality duty as well.
Councillor Ashbury.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just really wanted to back up what Councillor Wilson said earlier, having been involved with the working group looking at the provision of sites and the significant unmet need we have and the uncertainty regarding future supply of traveller sites. We do, as a borough, have a challenge, and I think that would weigh quite heavily in any appeal against us were we to turn this application down.
Any other comments, members? Councillor Tedder?
I agree that there is an unmet need. There's an unmet need for a lot of housing in this borough, and we have applications that are very finely balanced, and we don't say, oh well, yeah, that's all right then. Why is there an exception? This is a greenbelt site. It is right on the edge of the buffer zone. I'm not sure. I don't think they've got horses. They've certainly got big lorries, and they certainly haven't been there. That is certain. They don't own the access into the site anyway. They only allowed to drive over it, and I find it very difficult, but to support this, and I think we should really be looking and try and understand the why travellers and the residential communities seem unable to live together. And it doesn't matter whether they're, and this sort of thing where somebody wouldn't be able to come along and say, well, I want to build a house there, but we can do traveller pitches. Well, why can't we build some houses there for the homeless? Because they're just as desperate.
Thank you. Any other members? Comment? Neville?
Thank you. Just in terms of the matter around the 400-metre buffer zone, it's either inside the buffer zone or outside of the buffer zone. Whether it's close to or not, I think there's a reason why the line is where it is, so I don't think we need to speculate on how close it is. In terms of the applicants being at the address or not, I mean, the evidence that we've had is that they have been on the site for a number of years, and that's why we have the pending enforcement investigation going on. We also need to consider the benefits of this site. As I've said, there's limited harm in terms of the character and amenity impact. There's no amenity impact also. There's no highways issues also. There's no flood risk issues also. And when we consider the amount of land outside of the settlement boundaries that also falls within issues with flood risk, this is a appropriate and acceptable site in that regard. And the alternative would be looking at essentially another site within the Greenbelt that potentially has greater harm in terms of amenity, greater harm in terms of the character of the area, as well as other issues in terms of the flood risk. And when we look at the other sites that we've tried to identify as part of our draft local plan process, we found it incredibly difficult. I just want to stress that to members today.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, on personal knowledge, they haven't been there for years. It was an equestrian where one lady had a couple of horses. It was Oakley Nurseries, and as I said, they haven't got the right of way. They've only been there a short time, and certainly when you talk about highways, it's right on the verge of the brow of the hill of a very narrow road, and if you meet a lorry coming the other way, where you don't really know where to escape. So, and that's from personal knowledge, as I don't have to declare how close I live, but I'm close enough to see what happens every day.
Thank you. Anybody else got any new points? No? We have an officer recommendation. Councillor Wilson.
I'm happy to propose it, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Seconder. Councillor O'Mahony. All those in favour, please raise your hands.
So this is voting for the officer's recommendation to grant subject to conditions and a legal agreement. Voting for, we have Councillor Cliff Betton, Councillor Sean Garrett, Councillor Ling Perrott, Councillor Liz Noble, Councillor David O'Mahony, Councillor Murray Rowlands, Councillor Kevin Thompson, Councillor Alan Ashbury, Councillor Valerie White, and Councillor Richard Wilson. Anyone against? That's Councillor Pat Tedder. and we have no abstentions.
So the motion is carried. That brings us to the end of this evening's. I would just remind councillors, especially in the light of our discussion earlier, that there is some training with legal counsel coming up in 4th of April. I think, if at all possible, we all ought to be there. Thank you and good night.